Welcome, everyone. This is the next lecture in our series on academic freedom and the question of Palestine. It's my honor to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Stephen Salaita, who present a paper entitled No Resurrection, The Life and Death of the Modern University. Bodes very well in the current circumstances. Dr. Salaita is a well-known writer, researcher, and political commentator. In addition to his numerous media appearances and articles, including in many mainstream publications, he has published, if my calculations are correct, at least 10 books. I'll only mention a few. His first book, Anti-Arab Racism in the USA, Where It Comes From and What It Means for Politics in 2006, won the Gustavus Myers Center for the Study of Bigotry and Human Rights Outstanding Book Award. His most recent work includes Uncivil Rights in 2015, which relates directly to a lot of the campus organizing that's going on now around the question of Palestine, as well as Internationalism, Decolonizing Native America and Palestine in 2016, and Honest Living, a memoir of peculiar itineraries in 2024. Very recently, I actually just got a copy myself, Daughter, Son, Assassin, a novel from 2024, published with Common Notions, a publisher I all encourage you to check out if you're not familiar with their work already. He also has a forthcoming novel later this year entitled Jerry and Rodrigo Go to War, which is also with Common Notions. So Dr. Salaita's talk will be followed by a question and answer session. I believe he has prepared comments of about 30 to 40 minutes, so we'll have plenty of time for discussion. As in all of our other teach-ins on academic freedom and the question of Palestine, we seek to maintain, of course, a civil, sober, and scholarly rigorous orientation to the conversation so that we can seriously engage with the issues at hand and not get distracted by the thoughtless repetition of propaganda talking points or dogmatic hostility to well-researched scholarship. Please respect these guidelines so that we can have the most robust and productive conversation possible, even if there are disagreements. So that the conversation is democratic, we have the opportunity to hear from as many people as possible. We ask that you formulate questions in a concise and straightforward manner, limiting your questions to approximately 3 minutes. Apologies in advance if I ask anyone to wrap up their question and stick to time. This is simply in the interest of allowing as many people as possible to participate in the conversation. The very last thing that I wanted to say is that it's an exciting time on Villanova's campus because there's a lot of good organizing that's going on and excellent organizations, the majority of which are represented here. I'm going to circulate a legal pad, and if you're interested, please put your name, your preferred contact information. This can also be non-Villanova contact information if that is your preference, as well as what you're interested in. I'll cite, of course, the faculty and staff for Justice in Palestine who have been at the core of organizing these events if you're interested in getting involved. There's a reboot of the AAUP chapter at Villanova, and if you're interested in getting involved on that front, please put that as well on the legal pad. There's also, I see Professor Bagai who's here, Philosophy and Social Change, a new kind of committee that is being launched within the philosophy department. If you're interested in that, please say that on the legal pad. And for the students, there's also Students for Justice in Palestine, as well as the Global Social Justice Initiative. Again, get connected, sign up. I can use this legal pad to put you in touch with all of the important people running these organizations. And I'll note on April 25th, GSJI is planning another basketball tournament to raise funds for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. With all of that in mind, then, please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Salaita.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much for hosting me. It's a tremendous pleasure and honor to be here at Villanova, and I want to thank the hosts and the organizers in particular. I know that these sorts of things require a lot of hard work and a lot of effort, most of it thankless, and so it's deeply pleased to be here at your behest, and I hope that the comments I deliver will feel worth your effort. And I want to thank Professor Rockhill in particular. I'm coming here from Cairo, and I'm only in the U.S. for a small amount of time, and so the logistics of putting this sort of thing together were quite challenging. And he was deeply helpful and patient, and I appreciate it. So, as Professor Rockhill said, I'm gonna go through some prepared comments, and then I'll look forward to to having a discussion with you afterwards. If you have any questions, I'll do my very best to answer them. My first academic job was at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. I was extremely lucky to have landed that job. I was fresh out of graduate school and had mailed off around 150 applications between September and December. It was 2003, and these things were still done in hard copy back then. I got a few screening interviews at that year's MLA convention. Who else remembers sitting awkwardly on hotel beds trying to describe your pedagogical philosophy to grouchy hiring committees? But nothing came of them. By early February, things weren't looking good. Then I got an email from the dean of Whitewater's College of Letters and Sciences. I had presented at the MLA, and the dean was in the audience. He had approached me afterward to say that he loved my research, and we exchanged information. I had a flicker of hope at the time, but it appeared that nothing had come of our encounter. A month later, I accepted a job at Whitewater. After a lifetime in religious conservative states, I was excited to move to Wisconsin. Most of Whitewater's faculty lived in Madison, about a 50-minute drive, give or take, and my wife and I decided to do the same. I had great hopes for a vibrant political life. Madison was known to be one of the most progressive cities in the United States. That reputation turned out to be true, but it led to disappointment rather than vibrancy. It didn't take me long to understand that progressive came with its own problems, namely that it is mostly just conservatism with a different aesthetic. The point was driven home during my second year at Whitewater. A group of activists from UW-Madison was trying to implement divestment resolutions at the various UW campuses. These were the early days of BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, and the activists were more often met with hostility than curiosity. One of their leaders was a philosophy graduate student named Muhammad Abed, who was an absolute dynamo. Persistent and brilliant, Muhammad left his fingerprints all over the movement. It wasn't only Zionists or individuals/institutions invested in Zionism that early BDS leaders had to persuade. Many, if not most, radical faculty at the time were reluctant or lukewarm. Some were outright hostile to the idea of boycotting Israel. People now recognize BDS as what the youth like to call the bare minimum, but at the start, we had a hell of a time getting leftist faculty on board. The hesitancy corresponded to a person's stature or the prestige of their institutional affiliation. As is typical of professors, they came aboard only when BDS became a marketable commitment. Anyway, that was the context in which Muhammad and his friends were operating. They had made significant progress in Madison and were eager to organize Whitewater's faculty. I met with them and explained that there was a decent chance of succeeding. My department was filled with people who considered themselves scholar activists and always seemed to be agitating for or against something or other. We managed to get the question of divestment onto the agenda of the next faculty senate meeting, which the crew from Madison would attend. The agenda item attracted notice, and I heard some of my colleagues whispering about it. They were planning to go, I gathered. It was with great excitement that I turned up at the Senate meeting, confident that divestment was the perfect issue for intellectuals who had opposed the U.S. invasion of Iraq, were disgusted by racism, and who spent most of their time complaining about reactionaries. Indeed, a number of my colleagues from my department were there, along with folks from throughout the college. We chit-chatted until the meeting was called to order. After Muhammad's group had presented the case for divestment, the chair opened up the floor for comment. One by one, my colleagues stepped forward to oppose the resolution. What I remember most isn't anger or shock, but loneliness. The feeling was pronounced. I was saddened by what I viewed at the time as a betrayal. I view it now as normal protocol. But the sense of being alone on the issue, embedded in every Palestinian's consciousness, felt almost brutal. Indeed, calling Zionist colonization an issue feels a bit obscene. It's not an issue limited to rhetoric or opinion. It's a matter of survival and sustenance, of justice and reparation, of dignity and self-respect. How could educated people miss something so obvious? How could society's leading whites be so hard-hearted? Like many before me, I was left to wonder how Palestinians are supposed to exist in this world when the world in its current incarnation requires our non-existence. The moment made clear to me a yawning discrepancy between self-branding and praxis among the professoriate. When something more than performance is at stake, or when a real threat arises against the status quo, a great many people immediately retreat into liberal orthodoxy. Few things induce this retreat more effectively than Palestine. I knew this already. I was a maladjusted kid, often in trouble. A good kind of trouble, I'd say, though I suppose my parents would disagree. I resisted any sort of religious indoctrination, didn't want to pay homage to the flag before pep rallies, hated my teachers, and thus made low grades on purpose. Despite my dim reputation, I was sharply observant. I watched for potential allies. The rich kids were out, for obvious reasons. The nerds as well. The jocks were straight up enemies. That left the metalheads, the hillbillies, the minorities, and the stoners. They also proved useless. Black combat boots, snuff rings on the back jeans pocket. If you're not from Appalachia, you might not get that reference. But those of us from the South know exactly what I'm talking about. Nose piercings, facial hair, unmitigated hate for the man. But by God, they always stood for the national anthem. I've known for 4 decades that you can't expect anything but disappointment from self-appointed rebels. In Wisconsin, I was hoping for something different. The ensuing years have been unforgiving of my naivete. Some things don't change, but the timelines and adornments. Now I scan an industry whose tenured stratum appears to fit the part. Fashionably shabby or slickly stylish clothes, transgressive vocabularies, vintage glasses, smirks, tattoos, incredible credentials, lots of rebelliousness in the features. But take a closer look. They always go back to the Democrats. They always disavow violence. They always caution pragmatism. They always soft-sell US-sponsored coups and counter-revolutions. In other words, they always end up standing for the flag. I can sense a lot of inner monologues right now about exceptions, personally or otherwise. And yes, of course, I agree. There are many exceptions. Remember, though, an exception by definition contravenes the norm. We can acknowledge the exceptions. We can celebrate them even. But ultimately, we have to deal with the norm. The terrible situation now facing higher education wouldn't exist if the exceptions were significant enough to become unexceptional. This terrible situation I speak of should be self-evident, but I'll highlight some of its features. Systematic persecution of students, including suspension, expulsion, police brutality, arrest, doxing, defamation, and deportation. A corresponding persecution of faculty, including job termination, cancellation of classes, and vigorous surveillance, and a virtual embargo on anti-Zionist sentiment for anybody boasting an institutional affiliation. All this as both major political parties underwrite and frequently celebrate genocide. The modes of repression now on display aren't novel. They're more intense and overt. Anti-Zionism, as with any other revolutionary movement, for years has evoked the wrath of universities and the centers of power that they serve. Professors long have been fired, denied tenure, or otherwise disciplined at the behest of Zionist organizations. Each time it happened, the infested parties would plead with colleagues throughout the industry to develop sites of countervailing power. Some tried, but most went on with life secure in the knowledge that managerial persecution would happen only to other people, most of whom were probably asking for it. And now here we are. The government is disappearing student activists, outlawing certain forms of speech, revoking work and study visas, and demanding that administrators transform their campuses into police camps if they want federal money. Everyone is rightly terrified. But I insist on pointing out that plenty of us were terrified all along. That should have been enough to disrupt the status quo. I also insist on pointing out that the current situation is no surprise to anybody who has been paying attention to Zionist tactics on campus for the past few decades, although the depth and intensity of the persecution has been jarring. There's never been a moment when Zionists allowed for expressions of dissent. They've been targeting Palestinian students and professors since at least the 1960s. It was never quaint. They were just as brutal 30 years ago as they are today, only the dynamics have changed. Too many people who pretended to know better humored their nonsense. Why? I'm not always sure. Could be ambition, could be tacit affinity, could be self-preservation, could be old-fashioned cowardice. Whatever the reason, not enough faculty with power or with access to power stood up for the vulnerable, not just Palestinians, but contingent faculty, Black people, immigrants, grad student unionizers, and workers usually absent from the conversation altogether, gardeners and custodians and cafeteria staff and bus drivers and so forth. Some of those faculty outright aligned with management. This compliance is how they earn proximity to power in the first place. Herein exists the great danger of not abiding by a set of principles vis-a-vis the dispossessed and acting on those principles as necessary. A bunch of nobodies get punished. Everyone shrugs. Friends of those nobodies urge somebody, anybody, to act. Everyone shrugs, but with a careful eye on the situation. When the issue hits the news cycle and becomes a controversy, they finally act, but not to support the nobodies who are now somebody. Oh, they may say the right things, but it's the spotlight, not the injustice, that has piqued their attention. Their role is now to temper or co-opt any radical potential emerging from the discontent. They're no longer shrugging. Now they are intellectuals. Now they are leaders. Does this sound fanciful? I guess, if you want it to. All I can tell you is that I lived it more than once, and I've observed the process in action dozens of times since. It's like an emerging fashion trend. Once you notice it the first time, it suddenly becomes ubiquitous. I'm not trying to theorize from afar. I'm explaining in practical terms how so-called radicals can perpetuate the very system they apparently oppose. This culture of social climbing meant that the professorial class was completely unprepared for the Zionist genocide and the intensified persecution that came along with it. By unprepared, I mean intellectually, politically, and organizationally. Intellectual unpreparedness was evident in the many think pieces pathologizing Palestinians as latently warlike, and by the compulsion to prioritize the angst of Israeli settlers and diasporic Jews. Political unpreparedness came about through a long-standing addiction to Westphalian buzzwords like democracy, human rights, and authoritarianism, without a concomitant recognition that in practice they usually reify the logic of US imperialism. Organizational unpreparedness was probably the most damning problem. Few campuses had structures in place that could repel managerial abuse. More people needed to be strike ready, for example, not that striking appears to have been a consideration. Faculty should always try to develop networks that allow them to move quickly against administration in moments of crisis. And now faculty need to want this kind of network for it even to be a consideration, which is a proto-problem perhaps greater than the subsequent one. So now, as the Zionist entity continues to triumphantly steal land and terrorize its neighbors, and as universities have become open participants in this terrorization, our options appear to be twofold. Speak up and risk being neutralized, or pretend that higher education will course correct because it is inherently virtuous. And the second option no longer exists. Clearly, you all agree with me there. And it never did, to be clear. The virtues of higher education were always tethered to capital accumulation. I'm speaking in a more literal sense. It's too late for nostalgia or romanticism. The university can no longer pretend to be a benighted site of inquiry and erudition, some peaceful hermetic landscape outside of the real world. It killed its own mythology, and it's not getting resurrected. The vicious campaigns of repression we're seeing throughout the West and many Arab countries are both an extension and byproduct of the Zionist genocide. I mentioned earlier that there is plenty of precedent for what we're currently seeing. That precedent goes well beyond Palestine and originates with Black and indigenous peoples, communists or perceived communists, and so forth. However, there are some new developments worth attention. For instance, we're seeing an unprecedented marshaling of administrative resources, which allows for a large volume of repressive acts. The repression affects both individuals and organizations. Safety in numbers no longer exists for the activist, but the numbers benefit management because despite the increased capital it requires, mass punishment exhausts the diminishing resources of the oppressed. Management, like the state it wishes to protect, has opted for collective punishment. The most noteworthy development is emphasis on Zionism as an inborn characteristic. The notion of Zionism as somehow being an immutable feature of Jewishness has been around for a while. Although Jewish scholars of various ideological leanings have cautioned against it, now Zionist organizations are putting it forward as an indisputable truth to be codified in law. Maura Finkelstein, for example, was fired from a tenured position at Muhlenberg College, just up the road, based on this rationale. According to Muhlenberg, Finkelstein didn't create a hostile atmosphere for Jews, although this accusation was evident in the complaints about her. She created one for Zionists, which required nothing more than empathy for Palestinians. Other universities have run with the precedent. Currently, politicians across North America and Europe are rushing to make Zionist a protected category, even as they roll back or eliminate hard-fought civil rights victories for other minority groups. It's a curious move. Although it will clearly have some short-term benefit to the pro-Israel crowd, it has potential to be a long-term disaster. It used to be that anti-Zionism was conflated with anti-Semitism to create a pretext for recrimination. Now the anti-Zionism itself is verboten on grounds of racial intolerance. I can see no happy ending for either Jews or Palestinians in this scenario. Speaking of anti-Semitism, and here I put it in quotation marks to denote the accusation and not the act itself, let me speak directly to self-described anti-Zionist Jews who insist on shoehorning anti-Semitism into conversations about Palestine. I don't know how else to say it, so I'll just say it. Nobody's interested in entertaining that bullshit any longer. Nobody has the capacity to entertain it any longer. We spent 18 months watching corpses pile up in Gaza. Our families, our friends, our compatriots. We're seeing the Zionist entity steal more land by the week and bomb 4 countries at the same time. We're being silenced with brute force throughout the global north, all in the name of safety and security for the Jewish people. Pardon us for not being in the mood to humor the rationale for our own obsolescence. Not to mention that for decades, these haphazard allegations of anti-Semitism have caused us, Palestinians, Muslims, Black people, dissident Jews, tremendous harm as individuals and communities. Nevertheless, out of courtesy and a sense of compassion innate to our politics, we went out of our way to reassure you that our opposition to Israel has nothing to do with animosity toward Jewish peoplehood or to Judaism in general. We often set aside our own concerns to highlight these distinctions. We wanted an inclusive space, and I'm deeply proud to have been part of many movements boasting a multi-ethnic and confessional disposition. We tried to practice a vision of liberation, and more often than not, we succeeded. And still, countless people had their reputations destroyed, lost their jobs, got snatched up, and deported. Now we can see the end game. It wasn't just our problem as Palestinians or Muslims or Black people or as anti-Zionists in general. No, it was an obvious prelude to right-wing dominion. Phony charges of anti-Semitism led to the destruction of Corbyn's movement in the UK. While that movement had some flaws, it also showed real promise and offered a sense of hope to people otherwise treated as surplus. These phony charges are a reliable way to undermine revolutionary Black politics and have been used to impede the momentum of every decolonial formation in recent memory. Now to the main justification for police brutality, expulsion of students, revocation of degrees, cancellation of visas, travel bans, speech restrictions, and judicial hostility. Anti-Semitism has become the soundtrack to fascism. I also want to point out that the Palestine Solidarity Movement never needed to be educated about the distinction between Zionists and Jewish people, certainly not by Westerners, with little to no understanding of Palestinian culture and history. Our intellectuals and freedom fighters already made that distinction. It's there in Antonius, in Habash, in Kanafani, in Bernawi, in Said, in Khaled, in Ode. It's there in the communiques of every single political party formed in Palestine since 1900. The inherent racism of Zionism, even in its humanistic iterations, should have been a much greater focus. Instead, well-meaning and bad faith observers spent decades excusing Zionism as a mere disagreement. This emphasis on the ontology of the settler is a source of great frustration in the Palestine Solidarity Movement. Gratuitous accusations of anti-Semitism have functioned as one of the most effective counter-revolutionary tactics of the past 100 years. Those accusations merely provide the government a reason to make a lot of good people miserable. We don't need to resurrect what once was. Yes, academia has visibly gone downhill, but the past can be seen precisely in what exists today. The endpoint we want arises from a different beginning. Looking at the state of things on campus these days, it would require some pretty strong denial or servility to say that academic freedom is real, to view labor conditions as acceptable, to be satisfied with the job market, or to envision a stable path forward for the industry. Whatever any of us might imagine to be the glory days aren't getting resurrected. This moment constitutes what we might call a revolutionary impasse. Two forces are struggling to implement wildly different visions of higher education. One of those forces has the weight of militaries, governments, and corporations on its side. The only option for the opposing party is to vanquish the more powerful force altogether. Obviously, this is a tall order, perhaps fantastical in both rhetoric and action, but we should nevertheless position it as our ultimate aspiration. A reformist approach will at best reinforce the impasse. Let's not allow our imaginations to be constrained by bourgeois common sense. If all we manage to accomplish is a legacy sustaining the idea of freedom, then we will have fulfilled a critical responsibility to ensuing generations. Because of the revolutionary impasse, more anti-imperialists are being forced to understand that the modern university is central to the system they oppose. The university isn't a world apart or a parallel entity. It is both a guarantor and beneficiary of US power. We don't agitate against campus policies without also proffering opposition to capitalism and militarism, intentionally or not. If we fail to make the connection, then we'll eventually lose the energy and vision needed to sustain us. As a student, I was active in various organizing efforts, mostly to do with Palestine. This activity continued into my academic career, although I've slowed down in recent years, or maybe I've become active through different ideas of engagement. Somewhere along the way, I realized that we weren't organizing against corrupt campus administrators. We were up against capitalism, distilled into its most beautified form. Everything about campus presented a utopian veneer at odds with a simmering class antagonism. This kind of realization is easy to come by. Now that management and their wealthy donors have decided to bare their teeth, the antagonism is out in the open. We should bare our teeth in return. I suggest moving away from civil liberties as an organizing principle and intellectual approach. Access and redistribution are more important goals. More difficult, yes, but more impactful with much greater potential. Faculty have to seriously think about various forms of refusal or withholding labor altogether. Forms of refusal might include walkouts, canceling classes, not turning in grades, and declining to participate in assessment and other bureaucratic hassles. I mean, that one should be an easy sell. Twist my arm, Any refusal should come with an explanation highlighting its purpose and specifying what is needed to resume operations. Withholding labor can come in the form of authorized or wildcat strikes. Here's the point. Okay, whatever. Sometimes a campus needs to be shut down. When a university is actively harming its own students and employees, then making that university inoperable is more than a strategy. It's an ethical commitment to the well-being of those suffering the harm. I'd also recommend refusing to collaborate with anyone known to back the genocide, whether the backing is loud or low-key. This tactic may be less impactful than direct action and might be seen as a form of personal satisfaction, but if it's widely adopted as a practice, then it will prevent Zionism from being accepted as normative, one of the few sources of power available for us to leverage. Likewise, go ahead and quit paying dues to scholarly associations that refuse to adopt BDS or are otherwise complicit in Zionist aggression. Workshops for Gaza, and that's with a 4, has a page set up where you can direct the money to organizations working on the ground in Palestine. So if you don't want to pay your MLA dues to MLA, you can pay them to the Samir Project or whatever. In any case, we're not at a disadvantage because we lack ideas, but because we lack power. Human beings have incredible capacity to devise creative forms of resistance. The best contribution I can make to the process is a firm suggestion that amid the current impasse, we cannot let revolutionary sentiment be lost to nostalgia about a free and open-minded university that never actually existed. So I still believe in the ability of universities to serve the collective good. I hope to someday inhabit a society in which this kind of university can exist. The current one is salted against the possibility. The universities in the United States are too invested in imperialism, that is, extraction and accumulation, to serve the needs of the people. Because of Palestine, they no longer bother to hide their allegiance. I spent 5 years away from campus, and when I returned in 2022, it was a different scene. Many things were the same, of course. Some students are serious, some are immature, some know what they want to do, some are waiting to decide, some are ideologues, some are apolitical. Almost all immerse themselves in the excitement of new relationships. As a group, they possess an infectious sense of curiosity and promise. These things, I reckon, are universal. But technology and politics had moved into new territories since my last gig in 2017. Machine learning models were just hitting the market. Bureaucratic obligations for faculty had increased. Contingent and part-time teachers took on an even greater load. Upper administrators had proliferated. Many of our tasks were now automated, which ironically increased the amount of time they required. And the youth somehow seemed older. They understood, if only implicitly, that they were entering into a world of economic scarcity, a world of ecological precarity, a world of ideological crisis. I had experienced some rough times in academe, but still, I found it to be more depressing than ever. Palestine remained a controversial topic, but student activists had done a terrific job of making it legible to their peers and working for policies to address their institution's complicity in Zionist colonization. I nonetheless had a distinct sense that management adhered to a tenuous détente which would collapse if activists became too unruly. The events following October 7th bore out the feeling. There was always a latent hostility to Palestinians underlying managerial professions of tolerance and inclusiveness, punctuated by moments in which the hostility became explicit. Now, the hostility has become the default, and I can't imagine any path to reconciliation in the current environment. We're talking about places that are punishing students and employees for opposing a genocide. Let me repeat. They are punishing students and employees for opposing a genocide. A genocide which their government underwrites, a genocide in which the same universities they attend are implicated. The only way this observation fails to resonate is if you don't appreciate the exceptional gravity of genocide, a problem that seems to afflict lots of people in the global north. What does an education even mean amid so much brutality transmitted onto our screens? And what does it say that we view attending class and concern for the genocide as separate pursuits, if not dialogical opposites? Sure, there can be overlap and even synergy, but the reality is that those of us who follow the news about Palestine find education to be a distraction or a nuisance. What we do suddenly doesn't feel so damn important. Indeed, it feels almost vulgar to be padding around campus while so many people are suffering, their pantries empty, their universities destroyed. We're long past the point where we should have dropped the notion of a sanctified campus, but now the very idea of the university is in question. Gaza has no universities left. Class mobility through education only applies to people located in centers of wealth, and even then, wealth accumulates unilaterally. We shouldn't abide notions of uplift that are predicated on destitution. It's hard anymore to pretend to students that our classes should be the most consequential thing in their lives. And this was the case before the Zionist genocide. More and more, I'm making allowances for aspects of life that are meaningful in a world filled with dread and sorrow. Iftar dinners, childcare, family visits, field trips, and so forth. It's not always the outside world that creates distress. Campuses are now part of the hostile externalities from which students need an escape. I put aside whatever allure I once associated with life on campus. It's a job. I used to think of being a professor as an avocation, but I can no longer append a sense of passion to an industry so corrupted by greed that it suppresses opposition to genocide. I haven't grown cynical, only more devoted to the ideals of justice and liberation that originally led me into this profession. I've merely realized that those ideals are incompatible with our surroundings. I'm happy that others are coming into the same realization. Well, this is the time of year when Christians celebrate the resurrection of Jesus. It's an excellent occasion to reflect on questions of violence and renewal. The story of the resurrection has a universal dimension that goes beyond the political dominance of Christendom. Everybody contemplates the implications of the story, whether they consider it literal or metaphorical. In the narrative, humanity's sinfulness is interpolated onto one person who is then humiliated and killed by an unjust government. By returning to life, the one who suffered intends to redeem us of our wrongdoings and allow for the emergence of a better society. It's a resonant story. We constantly resurrect fantasies of salvation, whether spiritual, economic, or ideological. There's an important analytical component to these fantasies. We have to figure out what is worth resurrecting and what is beyond redemption. What better place to contemplate this question than our temples of higher education? After all, the death of belief was always the life force of the modern university. Thank you. Okay, that's too long.
You want to handle your own questions? Or
we'll give it a try. Yeah, I'll give it a try. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Sure. Are there any questions? Please.
I thank you for the lecture. So you were talking about how people who self-appointing themselves as like rebels or just acting inherently opposition to like the status quo very often will backslide into like they'll go back to the Democratic Party, they'll stand for the national anthem, they'll salute the troops, they'll support the troops, and they're not a big fan of that one. And then one of the things you said is that they'll always condemn violence. But one of the things I was interested about is that is hearing your perspective on the role of violence in decolonization.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Thank you. I'll try to address that as well as I can. It's a big question. I guess, and I maybe it came through a little bit in the context when I, there's not really a space in many, if any, academic environments where you can even contemplate the question. It's because for me, it's not a matter of supporting violence or opposing violence as an unmovable principle. All right, it's a matter of exploring questions about violence that are already playing out in the world, and that we have some kind of ethical and intellectual and emotional relationship to. And if you can't even have that conversation, all right, above board in the university, these conversations tend to happen in various sort of tacit or underground capacities, unauthorized capacities, maybe we can say, then the university is actually misaligned with what's actually happening in the world, right? It's creating sort of a sanitized version of politics that it then perpetuates as universal. As to the question of violence, I guess what I was talking about, I certainly didn't mean, like street violence, right? Going out and mugging somebody or doing a hit and run or whatever. I'm talking about decolonial political violence, and there's been a lot of good writing since October 7th. A lot of incisive analysis. There's also been a whole lot of pathologization of so-called Palestinian violence, right? Because I think anything Palestinians do sometimes falls into that category. Right? And this pathologizing of what they say to be Palestinian violence arises from at least a tacit notion that this is the only way that they know how to behave, right? That there's something atavistic and thus inevitable about that violence. A lot of really well-known philosophers and/or intellectuals, I think, didn't know how to meet the moment, right? When this completely unexpected, explosive, act of anti-colonial violence sort of occurred, in Gaza and in southern Israel. Had we, right, or had more people, I should say, spent some time thinking through the histories of political violence in an anti-colonial framework, then it's quite possible that October 7th wouldn't have been seen as so strange and alien, right? Perhaps they would not have immediately rushed to validate and rationalize, right, the discursive justifications for the ensuing genocide. Perhaps they might have been a little bit more skeptical about the claims that the Israeli media and military were making without evidence or without any sort of validation that almost 2 years later, right, still don't have any evidence to support them. Shit, I remember, you all probably remember, like a week or two into the genocide where they bombed the hospital, right? And there's this enormous debate, Well, look at that debate now. It's like, really, y'all were debating this. So they destroyed every damn hospital, so some of them multiple times, Well, don't you look back at it and feel silly? Don't you feel like an asshole? Well, you should. Do you know what I mean? Because if you had any basic understanding of the Palestinian intellectual tradition, of Palestinian politics, of the decolonial intellectual tradition in general, right? You would have inherently been skeptical, right? You would have known that the colonizer performs very distinct acts of violence that are always predictable, all right? And that are always legible, right? And that are always repeated. And you would have understood that the native, the oppressed, the colonized, all right, performs forms of violence that are very often not only beyond your comprehension, but beyond your recognition, all right? And so this is what I mean when I talk. So I think that I don't think that you can look at Palestine now, along with other parts of the world, and say that violence has no place in a decolonial movement. How could you even say that as an ethical proposition to a group of people that are suffering genocide, that are facing extermination? We don't have anything to tell them about violence or nonviolence. Again, our role is to support them and to make sure that we're not playing this game of it's beyond respectability. Where where I want to prove that I'm a good, responsible intellectual. So I'm going to talk about these bullshit buzzwords. Do you know what I mean? That come out of the State Department's mouth every time it wants to perform aggression against a foreign country. I'm going to repeat this language. I'm going to slide into this language, right? Just to show that I might be with the Palestinians or I might be identified, but I still know what I'm doing as an intellectual. I still know what I'm doing as a scholar. No, you don't need to do any of that, right? What you need to do is listen to Palestinians, right? understand them, and learn what everybody in the global South, right, learns by the time they're 7-year-old, right? Don't believe anything that comes out of the mouth of the oppressor. Right? No, your 19 books and your Ivy League PhD, you can't figure this shit out. Do you know what I mean? I'm going to Egypt. Do you know, like, serious. I could find like a 5-year-old. Do you know what I mean? Like hanging off the back of the pickup truck. Hey kid, how you doing? You know, what do you think about what the government is saying? The government lies. Do you know what I mean? Like they know. And then we have people with their Harvard. You know, well, it's complicated, and I can, you know, hey, so we got to face up. We have to face up the question of violence. And you have to do it in a way that doesn't pathologize Palestinian history and the Palestinian present, or it doesn't pathologize the potential Palestinian future, right? Because we're well beyond the point where these questions are relevant. Right? Now it's a matter of stopping and hopefully reversing and extermination. That's it.
Right.
Sorry. Other questions, comments? I have this one, and then right behind. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for your talk. A lot of sort of left-wing discussion today situates what's going on here, like the crackdown on free speech and free academic inquiry in the United States, and also the U.S.'s support of genocide. They usually put it in the context of declining U.S. power and control over global capital.
Okay.
And so I was wondering, as a scholar situated in Cairo, in Egypt right now, do you see any sort of new emerging sort of like structures, solidarity, organization, currents of thought that are coming from the global South that, you know, in this situation of U.S. decline, so like what can we hope for emerging elsewhere if the United States is becoming more totalitarian and shutting itself off from the rest of the world?
Okay, thank you. That's a fantastic question and really well presented and challenging in all of the right ways. And I don't have a good answer for it. I really don't. And I apologize to everybody. I know that you would expect me maybe to say something useful, because that's a profoundly important issue. And it's also an issue maybe where we can locate a little bit of hope, right, or some sense of hope of emerging movements around the world that might disrupt the status quo, or that might shake things up a little bit, or at least put some kind of barrier, road bump to U.S. and Zionist domination in the region and beyond. But I don't have really anything hopeful to report from Egypt. I don't. I have nothing bad to say about the people in Egypt. I love the people there. I think they pretty much universally feel very deeply and strongly with Palestine. And if it were up to them, they would give full-throated, full-bodied support, to Gaza and to Palestine more broadly. But the fact of the matter is, it's not up to them, And I'm not gonna say they're doing the right thing or not doing the right thing. I'm trying to, because I'm a guest in Egypt. I'm not Egyptian. It's just none of my business to be suggesting to anybody what they should or should not do. I'm just trying to, as best I can, sort of report what I'm seeing. But it's a population that, precisely because of the imperialist circuits that you point to, in which they're trapped, right? They're living in tremendous precarity. Their currency isn't worth crap. Do you know what I mean? The currency is terrible. Inflation is through the roof. The poverty is tremendous. There's an elite, the military elite particularly. It's a military dictatorship, right? The military brass are accumulating more and more. All right. Anybody affiliated with the military runs all of the businesses, and so more and more people are going hungrier, right? More and more people are insecure, right? So they're really, I don't even know if you can say that it's leading to conditions for some kind of revolutionary potential, because in 2011 they already had a revolution, all right, and it was tremendous, it was unprecedented, and it ended up putting them in a worse position probably than they were in 2010. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that we often look to places in the global south, quite rightly, for a sense of inspiration, right? Maybe a source of hope. It's based on some kind of, and I did it just 5 minutes ago, right? On an understanding that they know, right? What the United States and Israel and the UK and the EU are about, a lot better than your average American. All of that is true, but they also, because of their relationships to the metropole, right, are in a subservient position that creates a tremendous amount of poverty and difficulty in day-to-day life. And so I would not expect to see anything in Egypt like what's coming out of Yemen. Let's put it that way. But it gives us an opportunity to understand the way that all of this stuff is interconnected. And that the leaders of the Arab world are very much captured, right, into these systems of imperialism. They govern with brute force. They exist to serve the capital class, the capitalist class, right, the Western imperialist, and it's really asking a lot in many cases to kind of expect disruption to those political systems when so much is at stake for people. Whatever happens, it needs to happen with an eye towards supporting those movements from the global north, from the United States particularly, because I don't know. I've been trying for a long time to find a reason to be hopeful for some sort of rupture. And then I just look at the way that wealth and power, military power particularly, are concentrated in the world. And sometimes it just seems like, the task is overwhelming. Yeah. I'm going to quit rambling because I've probably taken it in about 20 different directions, and I apologize for not saying anything of value there. So I'm just kind of sort of thinking aloud through some of my flirtations with nihilism that I want nothing to do with. Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk, Dr. Salaita, and the contributions to Palestinian struggle. I enjoyed the title of the talk, and I'm part of a revolutionary organization in Philadelphia that agrees with you. That the university, especially the Latin university, is dead. I'm also thinking about Within Our Lifetime, and I'm familiar with that organization, and they started on a university. And I think they made the correct decision to move away from the university
Okay.
to the community.
Mm-hmm.
And my question to you is, now you know my point of view. At what point does it become, irredeemable for leftist organizations to continue having events on university campuses to gentrify university students? And at what point do we have to say, let's go to the community, let's go to churches, let's go to unions, let's go to libraries? And I'm just saying that because I'm bewildered. I'm here at a university again in the classroom with you. So, at what point is it irredeemable?
Okay, thank you. That's a fantastic question. I'm not there yet. I'm not there yet simply because you can look at a lot of places. Villanova would be one of them, right? Where people taking serious risks, faculty and employees taking serious risks to their employment security, students taking risks. You all know what the risks are. I don't have to say them, right? It's serious risks. And they've shown here on this campus that, something can be built, right? And something meaningful and important can be built. Now, we have to think about it in terms of scale. And I fall into this trap. I don't know. I often have this line of thought. I don't know, maybe some of you all do, maybe you don't. I don't know. None of this shit is saving a single person. Do you know what I mean? What's even the point? What's going to liberate Palestine is, got nothing to do with how I'm living. All right, it's going to be liberated through the force of arms, right? Through diplomacy, through this, through that, But me doing X, Y, and Z is not helping a single human. It's not saving a certain life. But it's like, okay, well, that's the goal, right? The goal, I think, the ultimate goal, obviously, is for Palestine activists, the liberation of Palestine. Yes, but this doesn't mean that everything we do that falls short of that goal or falls short of contributing in a direct way to that goal, doesn't have any value. And I know that's not what you were suggesting. I'm sort of walking you through my process of thinking, but we build these little spaces, right? And then sometimes they become big spaces, all right? But we build these little spaces because it's important to be with other people, right? It's important to speak and to listen and to feel validated, right? It's important to know that, you're not alone, and that that you have a politics worth sharing, right? And various politics of others worth listening to and perhaps absorbing. And you also create the possibility that the community you exist in, whether it's an on-campus community or an off-campus community, right, isn't rendered totally ineffective because there is, whether it's small or big, a force of opposition in place, a force of opposition that can mobilize, a force of opposition that can throw a wrench into the machinery. All of these things are important, and I think that any good campus organizing, among students and faculty, who very much should be working together, of course, should have a reach into the community. I guess maybe not at all places that's the case, but I think more and more that's kind of becoming the norm, that people are trying to make connections off of campus with various working class communities, various community associations, and it depends on the community. I lived in Blacksburg, Virginia, for example, and there are places off campus where you can make connections, but it's not so easy, right? But you're in Philadelphia or in Chicago, or right there, there's plenty of sort of outreach you can do. So no, I think it should happen, as part of on-campus organizing. But no, I'm not at the point where I'm willing in this moment, or where I'm able in this moment to look down on anything sincere that other people want to do, whether it's on campus or off campus, because we need as much of that as we can get in this moment. I think this gentleman had a hand up earlier.
No, I'm from Egypt.
Ah, okay.
I want to give you just a.
Anything you want, please.
Egypt paid the price,
Mm-hmm.
big time, I know the history of the whole area.
Mhm.
I was in the army for 8 years. I was in armored division in 1973 war.
Okay.
I was in the Third Army, and if anybody know the history of the thing, so the Egyptians paid heavy price.
Sure.
So when I hear that Egypt is, I love Egypt. I love the Egyptian people like you do.
Huh?
I don't think the system now is bad. I think
Ah.
the system is very good.
Okay.
And he's trying to stay neutral.
Ah.
We paid enough price.
Ah.
Egypt has 110 million now.
Mhm.
Probably 30 million of them are refugees.
Ah.
And when, and I'm going to use foul language a little bit. When somebody, a felon, sits in the White House
Ah.
and he's talking to a criminal, an international criminal, Netanyahu,
Ah.
and tell him, you shouldn't give the Palestinians Gaza.
Ah.
And then our commercial media doesn't even comment or correct. I say, this is the Palestine.
Yes.
I mean, if people know the history, that's why I'm saying we have a commercial media.
Ah.
They want to sell.
Ah.
And no correction. No correction to all this lousy BS that's being said everywhere.
Yeah.
No mention, even when they mention, I'm Christian. I lived good with the Muslims in Egypt. Egypt now is living in a very good time. Even poverty is there. But the Egyptians are always chin up.
Yes.
So I just want to defend Egypt. Because
No.
this is my country. The country I was born in.
Of
I'm
course.
American. But I mean, I'm American Egyptian. And Egypt paid heavy price.
Sure.
So, I mean, we're going to Egypt for a visit next month. So everything is, what you're saying about the things about what happened to the Palestinians, I agree 100%. This is completely unjust. When you go to Israel, which I did, and visit, the Palestinians have a travel document. They don't have a passport.
Right.
They have no right.
Yes.
For 70 years, those people lived with no rights. No right to vote, no right to do anything. If they want to leave the country, they have to take a permission from the Ministry of Interior.
Yes. Yes.
When you see what happened, I'm against violence. I'm definitely against violence from both sides. But when you see the agreements of ceasefire, you say, we'll release hostages for 10,000 Palestinians. And you ask, why do you have 10,000 Palestinians? They were arrested with no charge. So the world now, when the president of France visited Egypt 2 weeks ago, Egyptians loved what he said. He said, we're going to help Egypt. So I get emotional about this. It's my history. I almost died several days, several times. I was in my 20s when I spent 8 years in that. But I still, even my kids who are born here, say, Dad, they put you in the army for 8 years and you almost died. I still love Egypt.
I do too, and I'm glad you're with us. Thank you.
That's my speech.
Yes, please.
I really paid attention to the way you defined the moment today as a revolutionary impasse. And I feel like there is such an important, it's so important to see the connection between the Palestinian people's struggle and the potential for American people's struggle with the Palestinian people, to see those as connected struggles. And even your response to the question of the university, in some ways you could see view yourself like as a really important public voice or public intellectual coming, tied to the university. But I feel like in this country, there's also a lot of, like, we call them podcasters. You could also see them as like these new voices of alternative voices of moral and political education, which is like a very important part of the lifeblood of society and raising the next generation. I kind of wanted to hear your thought on, like, your opinion on to Candace Owens, the Tucker Carlson, to Joe Rogan, or Bonds, who are associated with libertarians or even like the MAGA movement, who are coming out in support not just of Palestinian life, but very much anti-Netanyahu, anti-Zionist, and whether you think that is something separate from or could represent like a potential like change in the American people in the future.
Okay, thank you. Me and the nice person to your left were that's my friend my friend Adam Miyashiro. We're talking about this earlier today, and so I get his face like when you're asking the question, he's like, "Oh, see, he's gonna rant," Yeah, I have a lot to say about it, but I would before I want to offer something of an apology. I don't know, because I don't think I've ever been so ambivalent in my life. Like, what I mean, like, on the one hand, all my heart is with Palestine, and associated issues. But I want to fight. I want to do what I can. I want to whatever, all of those things. But there's so many sort of questions that are coming up, politically, that I don't even know how to wrap my mind around them anymore. That's why I prepared comments, or that's one of the reasons why I did. It used to be that I would just come and like talk, and I'm in a place where I don't always even know where my opinion falls on things. Okay, I see it this way, then I see it the other way, and it's a very, very strange condition for me, who was always the type of person who had an opinion, no matter how dumb or wrong-headed, right? And they very often were, and wasn't scared to share them, right? Sometimes at a great embarrassment to myself. But I guess all of this is a way of saying that that this question of sort of the right-wingers who are now, apparently anti-Zionist, I think what you might call my instinctive reaction, all right? And I don't think instinct is instinctual, by the way, but let's say my primary reaction would be, F them, they're horrible people, we don't want anything to do with them. And I think that's really kind of the way that I lean, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, I've heard a lot of people in Palestine say we take the support wherever the hell we can get it, and so like at the one in like this moment of tremendous crisis and distress, I think things change. But in the end, we have to think about it in two ways. One is I think anything that reasonably helps create the conditions for the end to this genocide, is important. All right. But at the same time, the genocide, as horrible as it is, I would say, for this moment, it's exceptionally horrible. It doesn't exist in a vacuum either, right? And Palestinians, right, and Palestine Solidarity organizers in North America also have relationships with and responsibilities and obligations to, right, indigenous nations, to Black people, to queer people, right, to various people, right, who are under direct threat from the existence of these voices, and we cannot lose sight of that. And I think not losing sight of that it doesn't put it at loggerheads with the idea that we need to end the genocide in any way we can, because what we're trying to do in ending the genocide is prevent a whole lot of people from dying, of course, but we are also trying to create a politics of life rather than a politics of death. And a politics of life goes beyond Palestine, right? That maybe so much of it is centered in this particular moment on Palestine for obvious reasons, right? But I in the end, look, people are going to do what they do. You know, I don't want to say I don't care, because I do care, but in the end, I just can't get on board with a political culture that is interested in reproducing, right, the kind of political logic, the colonial political logic, the racist political logic that leads to the genocide in the first place, right? And so we have to be mindful of the future, right? Even as we're deeply focused on the present. And I would also say that there's a long tradition, all right, on both the left and right of, you know, people using Palestine as a springboard for clout or notoriety, and I think that might be at play there as well with you know, with a lot of people. It's I don't know. It just we have to think about, you know, Palestine in relation to other sites of national oppression, right? Other sites of potential danger and harm. And in this sense, we also have to think about, and this is going to be my last point on this, or my last comment on this point. You have to think about what type of liberation is even available for Palestinians under the auspices of these, you know, sort of right-wing reactionaries. What's that liberation going to look like? What kind of state would that look like if they're in charge of it? It's going to be homophobic, hyper-capitalist, you know, so we have to think about all of these sorts of things and what, you know, what aligns with, you know, a value of the values of liberation, you know. Yeah. Please. Oh, sorry, and then I'll get right to you.
Yeah, my name's Cody. I'm with the Good Shepherd Collective.
You look familiar.
Yeah. I say Amid, Lara, Bana, I'll give you a big hug. And Jared from Millennials of Sculling Capitalism is also very sad not to be here.
Right back to you, brother. Right back to you.
One thing I wanted to say, and I guess kind of bring up, is kind of like the importance of, or balancing, like the definitions of these words of like anti-Zionism, kind of like getting into like just these discussions that are simply semantics. Because I think one thing that I think that certainly my colleagues in Palestine are concerned with is the way that it can feel that anti-Zionism has turned from this kind of like this decolonial praxis and kind of moved into like this branding mechanism. Because it's like, you know, this isn't like a slight to you, but it's like to describe like those folks as being like anti-Zionists, like detaches it from what Palestinians really understand as anti-Zionism.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is this, is that my colleagues back in Palestine, they say, look at Cody, they say, if we understand Zionism as a process of settler colonialism, then the opposite of that, anti-Zionism by definition would be decolonial. So that means the return of the land, the return of the resources, the return of the political structures, right? The you know, the resituating of the economy away from like this capitalist system. And so I think that for folks in Palestine, or some folks in Palestine, there is this way in which it can feel like what do you mean that criticizing Israel is anti-Zionism, right? And that's those are important material distinctions. And so I just want to hear like your thoughts on the importance of like just calling anything like anti-Zionism. That'd be like me being like, oh, I'm anti-racist because like I'm just randomly upset with like white people here and there. You know what I mean? Like anti-Zionism has to mean something a little more. So I just want your comments on that.
Okay. Thank you, and thanks for coming and greetings to your comrades from me. I understand that there's a wide range of ideological preferences and dispositions in Palestine itself, and then in the diaspora, and then in what are called the various Palestine solidarity movements around the world. But I have to confess, I'm quite protective of a version of, or a notion of anti-Zionism as Cody is kind of defining it as something that's also inherently anti-racist and anti-capitalist, and that always moves, right, to wherever you might find the downtrodden, right, as a way to see them, to be in community, and to work in service of their liberation. I don't know. There's a way that you can sort of tease out the logic of what anti-Zionism can mean in different contexts, and I think the way that kind of the intellectual tradition that I'm most amenable to, and that's the intellectual tradition of Habash and Kanafani and Fatima Barnawi and really the Palestinian left, right, the revolutionary left. Zionism always was automatically or always already oriented in revolutionary anti-colonial movements throughout the global South. It was already attached to the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, right, in Angola, in Southern Africa in general, in Vietnam, and on and on and on, right? So when you said anti-Zionist, that was just sort of assumed, right? That you're sort of locating your opposition to Zionism in this particular material and philosophical space, right? When people who are, I don't know, I'm trying to think like a diplomatic word and I can't. So when people who are racist social climbing dipshits use anti-Zionism, but you can sort of trace a particular genealogy to that term that doesn't really sort of hold up to the ways that Palestinians throughout the decades have understood anti-Zionism. What I mean is, it's like, okay, I don't know, they call themselves MAGA communists, for example. All right, that's one of these like sort of formations that we're talking about. And some of you, I can see some expressions. I don't know. Okay. Don't ask me to explain. It's a thing. All right, it's a thing. By the way, that I think has enough backing to where it ought to be regarded as suspicious. Yeah. All right, it's something that grows that quickly and it gets that much backing, out of nowhere. Anyhow, okay, we'll leave that aside. All right, I think we should always be suspicious anyhow. But what does it mean to support Donald Trump, right, as a politician, right? But then to also say you're anti-Zionist. I think nobody exemplifies this more really than somebody like Tucker Carlson is kind of, I wouldn't say he's an anti-Zionist, I don't know if he's ever going to identify as one, but he's moving into a space where he's more critical of Israel, and I think he's started to sort of capture that particular demographic that has sort of grown up in the United States, which, by the way, has antecedents in sort of the Cold War, right, realist Republicans of the 1970s, those who, if you're old enough, right, like the old Washington Report for Middle East Affairs crowd, I was telling you what Edward Said called the State Department Arabists, all right? There's a version of political realism, right, that you could sort of trace. It's like an America First anti-Zionism, all right? Now this new version is, do you know what they're really, really like into the USS Liberty? Because it's an attack. It's because there's an attack on the U.S. military, right? Like, not that it wasn't a tragedy, but y'all know what I'm talking about. I'm just trying to locate you, sort of in a particular space, right? Like, yeah, no, is it working? Okay, so it has an antecedent, but this is kind of like a souped up. Do you know what I mean? Fentanyl fueled version. All right, and so so let's take Tucker Carlson. Okay, he's against the genocide. He's this, he's that, but he's pro-Trump. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? So what does it mean to oppose a policy where you're supporting the person implementing the policy? Right. Like, I mean, because that really, for us on the left, that was the problem with the Democrats. Right. Do you know what I mean? That was precisely the problem. So the same problem exists on the right. Like, don't tell me that you're the party of justice, the party of this, the party of that. Y'all are overseeing the damn genocide. Do you know what I mean? I don't care about anything else, right? You can call yourself whatever the hell you want. I'm looking at what you're doing. And so, yeah, I think that we ought to be careful with the term anti-Zionist, all right, because it very much can be an indicator of a particular type of Zionism. In fact, an old-fashioned kind of Zionism in some cases. But beyond that, this is not to say that it should have a singular definition, but the term does have a history, all right? We ought to understand its history. It does have a positionality in the Palestinian consciousness, all right, across the ideological spectrum. I think if you say anti-Zionism or I'm opposed to Zionism in Palestine, it does have a particular meaning, all right? Even if one person is an Islamist and the other is a communist, right? Do you know what I mean? It's going to have a particular meaning. And we ought not lose sight of the fact that all of these tactics and terminologies that we're discussing and that we're thinking about and that we're talking about, right, do have antecedents in actual Palestinian society, all right? And so we don't need them to be defined in any particular way in the United States, right? Let the MAGA communists, right, look at what Palestinians are saying about Zionism and anti-Zionism and see how well they match up. But of course, they're invested precisely in not giving a damn about Palestinians, right? The Palestinians don't even have anything to do with their anti-Zionism, right? Anyway, please, yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciated the way that you connected anti-capitalism and anti-imperialism to the struggle for the liberation of Palestine. Given that so many people who have been radicalized around the question of Palestine often come to the question due to kind of ethical and moral concerns that are absolutely valid, but they don't see the connections to the overall struggle against capitalism and global imperialism. I was wondering if you could concisely elucidate why it is that if we really want a free Palestine, we also need to dismantle the imperialist capitalist world order.
Okay, thank you. My friend and host Gabriel just go get him. That's a great. That's the heart of it in the end. Because the connections are obvious now, right? I mean, people had been exploring the connections for 100 years, but now they're obvious. Now they're blatant, and now there's no reason to not understand, right? The way Zionism is positioned as an important aspect of the U.S. imperialist project, right? Just the whole Israel is the tail wagging the dog things. We're seeing that that's not the case. The genocide, I have to remind you, right? Wouldn't have lasted 6 months. Wouldn't have even lasted that long with the constant, not even the diplomatic support, the constant resupply of weapons. Right. All right, they would have run out of weapons. All right. Israel, the United States has used Israel, right, has worked with Israel, however we want to put it, all right, to carve up Syria, all right. It's worked with Israel to completely, right, to affect a retreat of the resistance in southern Lebanon, right, to cut off arms supplies, right, to all of the resistance forces. It has worked with Israel, right, to bomb various countries in the region. So if you look at the geopolitical situation of the countries surrounding the Zionist entity right now, they are all not just in favor of Israel, but in favor of the United States and the particular order that has envisioned for decades. You can look at the history of, books have been written about it since the 1970s, all right, who Israel has supported in the world and why. Right? Hell, Israel was on Idi Amin's side at first, and until they weren't. Israel was a staunch ally of apartheid South African government, helped get its nuclear program off the ground. Right? Israel participated in I'm forgetting his name. The genocide against indigenous peoples in Guatemala in the 1980s and 90s, in El Salvador as well. So wherever, look, it isn't my rule. Like, I'm sure everybody's going to start trying to find exceptions, but I don't care. I'm still keeping it as a rule. All right. When I learn about like some kind of conflict in the world or some issue in the world that I really don't know anything about, okay, the first thing I'll look for, whose side is Israel on? Whose side the United States on? Do you know what I mean? And then okay, that's a good. Like in Armenia and Azerbaijan, like had a few years ago, I was like, okay, Israel's on Azerbaijan's side. Iran is on Armenia's side. I'm on Armenia's side. Do you know what I mean? Like that's a simple calculation, and it didn't lead me astray. Like, do you understand what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going towards like religion or ethnicity. It's like no, but I joke, but I actually use that as a metric. All right, and this is why I'm never get hired by the Ivy League, because this is not a good political science methodology. All right, it's not. You're gonna put that, you're a political realist or an idealist. I'm a political anti-Zionist and everything else. But beyond that, like no, there's something serious there. That it's inherently a recognition that Israel exists precisely to play this role in the world for the United States, and that the United States foreign policy, right, is inherently done or conducted in service of the ruling class, right, and with no eye towards making anything better for the countries in which it has some kind of relationship, whether military. So those are the assumptions underlying it, right? That the United States is exploiting other countries, right? And that Israel serves, right? As a site of or as an aspect of exploitation for Israel. But even beyond that, it's the way that capital, right, flows from these regions into the U.S. markets. All right, it's very easy to trace and to understand in the way that the weapons manufacturing economy is reliant, to some degree. Its stock dividends anywhere are reliant on Israel making war. All right, there's so there, yeah, you can't in the end. I'm thinking about political labels. All right, political labels over here, but you can't have a serious anti-Zionist politics or a serious understanding of anti-Zionism unless you precisely connect it into this imperialist marketplace, right, in which it plays such a central role. This is why I said somewhere in the talk that, when we're protesting, right, against Zionism on campus, all right, whether we know it or not, we're also protesting against capitalism and imperialism. Right? And not to make that connection really increases the chance of sort of running out of energy. Yeah. Right? The energy comes precisely from making these connections and developing them, working through them. Right. Yeah. Oh, please, go ahead.
Hi, thank you, Dr. Salaita. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Salaita, first of all, thank you for coming to our area. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm someone who's been active in the Palestine Solidarity Anti-Zionist movement for over 40 years. Yeah. I know I don't look black on crack, y'all. Anyway, Dr. Salaita, all these years, for me personally, I've had my proudest moment since October 2023. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, the left in the United States cannot imagine that amount of discipline and focus to pull that off. Because here on the left, we want to talk about each other on social media and criticize people's flyers. But somebody, basically parachuted in the middle of a festival and caused major damage and took hostages. What? We can't even take over a block in West Philly. You know what I mean? So for me, this is a proud moment for me. I can't watch any more videos of Palestinian suffering because I'm at my limit now. I
Yeah.
can't do that.
Yeah.
But I appreciate what Palestine is doing for us in terms of the research and developing a sense of discipline we will have to do, looking at all these ICE kidnappings and everything else. We're going
Yeah.
to have to really get up on our game.
Uh-huh.
Now, specifically, there are some people, for Black folks, we had to dig up our receipts.
Yeah.
Reverend Al Sharpton, Reverend William Barber, Reverend Raphael Warnock.
Mm.
Yes, I'm going down the list. And that's a long one. But you get what I'm saying.
I get what you're saying.
Some of these people have a history of being in solidarity with Palestine. October 2003 pops off. Now they want to dog out and drag out Hamas,
Yeah.
which has only been around since 1987. Talk about Reverend Al Sharpton.
Mm-hmm.
I know he knows better.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying all that to say that we're going to have to, gear up and do some things and do some real organizing and some networking and relationship building. Because right now, in the last few weeks, the president of Morehouse University, a major HBCU, had a Zionist conference on protecting Jewish students at Morehouse. Come on now. Come on now. At Morehouse?
Exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Y'all know Morehouse?
Yeah, I know Morehouse.
Okay, why? The president of Morehouse is going to that extent to get whatever paycheck. Cory Booker is giving workshops with AIPAC on how to recruit Black people to join the Israeli cause. Yes, 25 hours of nothing. I'm saying all that to say that this is giving us opportunities.
Yes.
I'm looking forward to the opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Even here in Philadelphia, we had a major campaign to save Chinatown against some 76ers basketball team that has not won a championship in over 4 years. Right?
Yeah.
And that record they got this past season, 28 to 50 something. But what I'm saying here is, even with that local struggle in Philadelphia, all the Zionists popped up out of that.
Wow.
Yes. Some of the 76ers owners, at least two of them are Zionists,
Uh-huh.
vis-a-vis the University of Pennsylvania, vis-a-vis campus apartments, and some other things that happened in Philadelphia.
Hmm.
And lastly, I just want to say, looking at Africa, Kagame and Rwanda and his ties to Israel. And Kagame is trying to bring NBA basketball to Rwanda and to that part of Africa. And he's trying to have a relationship with Adam Silver, who's an NBA executive. And they go back and forth talking about, oh, we're going to bring opportunities to Africa and kids are going to play basketball. What? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So all of these things are being exposed. This is a good opportunity for us.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to expose them any way we can. Candace Owens gets exposed too, because we know her history. She started out as trying to up and coming in the Democratic Party. They told her no, so she went to be Republican. Now that everything is swinging now, she got her hand up. Let me see which way the wind is blowing. Let me see what I can do about Israel and Zionism. Let me see what I can do with that.
Yeah.
So all the opportunists are showing themselves.
That's right. Yeah.
But the real organizers and the new organizers are showing themselves too.
Yeah.
This is where we come in. If I may just say this last part, I've had many a struggle. I'm a good church sister, believe it or not. I almost became a preacher. You know that, right? But it has really caused me as a Christian and some of my friends, Reverend Naomi here and others, we have to really examine our faith. Because nothing in Judaism, nothing in Christianity, nothing in Islam justifies Zionism. Just like nothing in the Abrahamic religions justifies slavery or racism or homophobia or transphobia. None of that. So this is calling for us to clarify, where does our faith lie? What Bible are we reading? Are we a church of the Old Testament or church of the New Testament? Or as church folks, right? So I'm looking forward to this. I'm excited about it. I'm exhausted because sometimes I'm reading everything that y'all writing and I'm trying to keep up. But we gonna win this. It won't be in my lifetime, but we gonna win this.
Yeah.
I'm just doing my part.
Yeah, you are. You are. Thank you. It's you know.
But I will call out a Negro Zionist in a minute.
I mean, you know.
I ain't playing with this.
Yeah.
We're doing this too long.
Yeah. I mean,
See that video of my big brother Kwame Ture at the University of Maryland, College Park in 1988?
I've seen a bunch of them.
Okay.
I've seen a bunch of them.
You know
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. I've seen a bunch of them. I mean, it's. I don't want to say, it's an honor and a pleasure to see you again, always, and to hear you. You know, I would like for us to get it done while you're still here, though. You know, I'd like for it to happen while we are all still here, because we deserve to enjoy a free world. You know, yeah.
Stephen, maybe in the interest of time, because we have the organizing conversation, right? Unless there's anything pressing, is there? Yeah, we'll do one last question then. Yeah.
It's related to what Gabriel was saying.
Please.
So thanks for being here.
Of course. Yeah.
I wanted to ask about why you think it is that Americans and Americans in the academy so frequently default to credulity toward the claims of Israel, and like you said, other oppressors, and specifically around Palestine, but even, and again, this is the last choice, what Gabriel was saying, sometimes self-identified liberals or whoever can, in the past 18 months can see, oh, the government lies about Palestine all the time. Why do you think it's hard for people to wrap their minds around the idea that the U.S. government lies about other countries?
Thank you. That's I probably hadn't thought about it enough to give you the good answer that you deserve, but it would be a combination of. I think that really even Gramsci's writings on hegemony, I think, do a brilliant job of sort of explaining the way that notions of common sense always sort of feed into the interests of the elite and of power. But so in that sense, it's a combination of education, right? Various forms of education, socialization, but probably the biggest culprit as people get on into adulthood are the way that corporate media inculcates people, even when it's purporting, right, to be to be oppositional, inculcates people into U.S. exceptionalism. And because once you recognize like sort of the tenets and aspects of U.S. exceptionalism, you can sort of trace it back, and you can see all the ways that it exists in ways that you might not have even noticed, right? Even when you were starting to to become aware and starting to question those narratives. But I think academia plays a big role in the reproduction, right, of these forms of common wisdom. This is why there's an idea that people who are well educated are, right, either more ethical or smarter. Do you know what I mean? Because I'm not saying that you all would believe it, but if you look like at the common wisdom in the world, right, the idea is that being more educated, makes you a better person or a better thinker. And I don't know, like we need to get to the point where you look at people with those elite credentials, and maybe you start to think that they're either perpetuating their own class interests, or that they're the biggest rubes around. Right? Usually both. And so, right? Do you know what I mean? Because their rubishness has a material dimension to it, right? But I guess what I'm saying is that all of us in this room, right, who are standing on anti-Zionism and all of these things, who identify in some way with some sort of revolutionary politics, could think to a moment in which you were, awakened, you can say, all right, or where you learned something important, or you were raised that way by your parents, maybe, all right, maybe some of y'all were red diaper babies. Do you know what I mean? We didn't have Zionism in my household. Do you know what I mean? So the anti-Zionism was the default, right? But But what I'm saying is, it's very rarely, right, the answer. So when did you start becoming, critical, right, of U.S. exceptionalism, right, U.S. patriotism, U.S. militarism, right? I mean, whoever effing gives the answer when I was watching 60 Minutes, do you know what I mean? Or in my Harvard econ class, like, you know what I mean? Like, right? It's not right. It's always somebody, right, who talked to somebody, right, who is kind of marginalized in some way, or you read a book that's not going to be assigned in your high school civics class, all right? Or you ran into people, this didn't happen on K Street in Washington, D.C., right? Do y'all understand what I'm saying? And I know it's a simple, crude, and rudimentary answer, but I guess it's the point that that unless you seek out alternate forms of insurgent and revolutionary thinking, right, then you're simply really not going to be exposed to the ideas contained therein. And even when you are exposed to them, it's almost always kind of done, in pop culture anyway, in an ironic way that refuses to take them seriously. There's a lot of like movies and TV shows that sort of gesture, to these kinds of radical politics, but it's very rarely in a way that to take them seriously. So yeah, that's hegemony. Thank you all, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks.